The movie begins in the 1930s, following a woman named Margaret who lives on a remote farm with her two daughters, Rose and Ollie. Rose is a teenager, while Ollie is still very young and was born deaf and mute due to an illness. Margaret also had another daughter, Ada, who passed away from the same illness, leaving her in constant fear that something similar could happen to her remaining children. Their home is surrounded by farmland, but the village is sparsely populated as each family owns large plots of land. Due to a long drought, farming has become nearly impossible. Food supplies are dwindling, and dust storms frequently sweep through the area, covering everything in dirt and causing illnesses. Margaret's husband Henry had left for the city to earn money and regularly sent letters with financial support, leaving her to take care of their daughters alone. She kept a strict routine, ensuring the girls were happy, taking them to Ada's grave to pray, and sealing the house tightly at night to keep the dust out. Struggling with grief and stress, she often relied on sleeping pills to rest. One night, as Margaret sleeps, Rose and Ollie read a book about the Gray Man, a mysterious figure said to have killed his family before disappearing into a dust storm, where he supposedly gained supernatural abilities. According to the legend, the Gray Man could turn into dust, enter people's bodies, and control them. While Rose dismisses it as just a story, Ollie becomes terrified, believing the Gray Man is real. The next morning, Margaret takes her daughters outside and notices two children staring at a dead cow. Later, she visits Henry's brother's farm, where his wife, Esther, and their two sons live. Esther reveals that their financial situation is worsening and that her younger son is seriously ill due to the dust. Margaret advises her to keep the house sealed and clean to prevent further health issues. Margaret then takes her daughters to a weekly gathering where the village women sew and talk. An elderly woman shares alarming news. The night before, a stranger had broken into a home, tied up the father, and killed the entire family. When authorities arrived, they found only the father alive, and his statement suggested something terrifying. Hearing this, Margaret becomes anxious, knowing her household consists only of women, making them vulnerable. Later, Esther decides to take her sick child to the hospital despite Margaret's warning about an incoming storm. As the storm hits, Margaret and her daughters rush home to secure the windows and doors. In the chaos, Ollie gets lost outside. When Margaret searches for her, Ollie sees a man standing in the storm, only for him to suddenly vanish. Terrified, she hides in a closet. When Margaret finds her, Ollie communicates in sign language that she saw the Gray Man. Though startled, Margaret dismisses it as a child's imagination, takes the book from them, and warns them not to think about it again. That night, strange noises echo from the ceiling, as if someone is walking above them. Margaret ignores it and goes to sleep. Days pass, and for the first time in years, their farm produces a decent harvest. While the daughters play outside, something terrible happens. One of them begins struggling to breathe and suddenly dies. Overcome with grief, Margaret finds herself drawn to the Gray Man's book and reads it before falling asleep. The next morning, Rose wakes Margaret in a panic, claiming to have seen a man outside. Grabbing her gun, Margaret steps outside and finds blood on the handle of her barn. Inside, she discovers a bloodied horse, Esther's horse. Following the trail, she comes across Esther's dead son. Esther, however, is found alive, covered in dust. They take her back home, but she insists on leaving for the city, fearing for her remaining child's life. Margaret, knowing they cannot afford to relocate, urges her to focus on cleaning and staying safe. As time passes, Margaret takes Rose to the doctor, who warns that her condition will soon worsen due to the dust. Later, at another village gathering, the elderly woman warns them that the mysterious stranger might strike again that night. Back at home, Ollie tells Margaret that she has seen the man once more. Margaret searches the attic but finds nothing. Then, while milking the cow, she hears sounds from above. Armed with a gun, she climbs into the attic and discovers that someone has been hiding under the floorboards. A man suddenly emerges and runs. Margaret aims her gun at him and realizes he is wearing her husband's jacket. Shocked, she demands to know how he got it. A man introduces himself as Wallace and says he works at the same place as Margaret's husband. He tells her that her husband gave him his jacket and sent him to check if they were safe. Wallace also says he is a preacher who can heal her daughters. Margaret doesn't trust him and tells him to leave, but then her daughter Rose suddenly gets a nosebleed. Wallace offers to help, and when he touches her nose, the bleeding stops. Rose is shocked to see this miracle. Because of this, Margaret starts to believe that maybe Wallace is a good man, so she lets him stay. However, she warns him not to go outside because people might say bad things about him. The next morning, they notice that it has rained, and Margaret finds it strange that rain came right after Wallace arrived. Later, while the women are at church, Rose informs Margaret that her cousin went alone to fetch water. Margaret is surprised and rushes to check on Esther, Esther. When she sees her, she is shocked. Esther is very sick, covered in boils. Sheriff Sharif is also there, and Margaret tells him that Esther is too ill to take care of her child. Sharif decides to take Esther's son with him. Esther, heartbroken, gives alcohol to Margaret and says if her child is taken away, then Margaret's children will also be taken from her. Later, Margaret visits the barn and meets Wallace. He asks why she looks so stressed. She tells him that after her daughter Ada died, she has never been able to sleep without pills. That night, her daughters come to sleep in her room and warn her that a storm is coming. Worried, she lets Wallace stay inside. During dinner, Rose finds a letter from her father in the letterbox and starts reading it. But when Margaret reads it, she is shocked. She immediately signals her daughter to bring a gun and points it at Wallace. The letter reveals that Margaret's husband's jacket was stolen. Inside it were chocolates for the children and money which he planned to send by post. Because of the theft, he was unable to send the letter earlier. Realizing that Wallace is a thief, Margaret orders him to leave. The sheriff tries to calm her down, saying Wallace only wants shelter, but Margaret insists he must go. Wallace tells her that he will return because he is the Gray Man. He then burns the letter so Margaret can't report him and disappears into the storm. That night, Margaret takes her sleeping pills, but she suddenly hears a noise outside. She finds her daughter Ollie crying. Then Esther appears and warns Margaret that the Gray Man will possess her and make her do terrible things. With a creepy smile, she slits Ollie's throat. Margaret screams in horror, but when she wakes up, she realizes it was just a dream. Rose, standing in front of her, asks if she was outside all night. Margaret now fears she is sleepwalking and that the Gray Man is after her daughters. Later that night, her daughter's room suddenly catches fire. Margaret rushes in and puts out the flames. She believes the Gray Man is behind this, but Rose tries to reason with her. Rose explains that she gave Wallace a book about the Gray Man, and he probably claimed to be the character after reading it. The Gray Man is just imaginary and not real. Then Esther arrives looking much healthier. Margaret invites her inside. Esther explains that she met a preacher who helped her recover. However, when Margaret asks for the preacher's name, she realizes it's someone else, not Wallace. Esther mentions there is a party at the church that evening, and they should all attend. Margaret starts behaving strangely. She cuts her thigh with a knife in front of her daughters and tells them not to worry, insisting she's fine. Rose and Ollie are terrified. At the church party, Rose tells the sheriff about her mother's behavior. When the sheriff talks to Margaret, she insists she is okay, but blood starts leaking through her dress. She dismisses it as a small injury and quickly takes her daughter home. At home, Margaret sews clothes, lost in her thoughts. Without realizing it, she sews her own hands to the fabric. When Rose sees this, she is horrified and cuts the thread. She tells her mother to control herself. Suddenly, Margaret hears a noise outside and grabs a gun. In the fog, she sees Wallace and shoots at him, but he vanishes. Rose, wearing a mask, comes outside and asks if she's shooting at Wallace. Margaret confirms, but then sends Rose back inside and stays in the fog. Later, Rose goes outside to check on her mother. Margaret, still paranoid, mistakes Rose for Wallace and almost shoots her. Just in time, she realizes her mistake. She tells Rose that she will do anything to protect her daughters and sends her inside. As Rose walks back, she trips over something. Looking down, she finds Esther's dead body. She realizes her mother killed Esther, thinking she was the Gray Man. Rose now understands that her mother is too dangerous. If she doesn't stop her, she and Ollie will be the next victims. Soon after, the sheriff arrives. He tells the girls to wait outside while he speaks with Margaret. Inside, Margaret insists that the Gray Man is real and is coming for her daughters. The sheriff tries to calm her, but suddenly Margaret stabs and kills him. Horrified, Rose picks up a knife, ready to kill her mother before she harms them, but she stops when she sees Ollie watching. Margaret then tells them that the Gray Man is going to kill them all, so they should die together. She crushes her sleeping pills and mixes them into their food, intending for all three of them to eat and die. Rose refuses to let this happen. She tells Ollie to hide in the closet. Then she pretends to cry and tells her mother that the Gray Man has taken Ollie outside. When Margaret hears Rose's cry, she rushes outside to find Ollie. She ties a rope around her waist and secures the other end to the door so she doesn't lose her way in the thick dust storm. As she moves further into the storm, desperately searching for her daughter, Rose, with tears in her eyes, makes the heartbreaking decision to cut the rope. She knows this is the only way to protect herself and Ollie. Margaret Margaret soon realizes what has happened. She looks down at the severed rope, her face filled with betrayal and shock. The storm grows stronger, and she is swallowed by the dust, disappearing into the endless wasteland. The next morning, as the storm settles, we see Rose and Ollie leaving the village. They are heading toward the city to reunite with their father. As they sit on the train, Rose gazes out of the window. The barren land slowly transforms into lush greenery, a sight she has almost forgotten. But then, she notices a swirl of dust in the distance. Her face hardens as she recalls everything they went through, and with that, the movie ends.